or hey, what's up, Mike?
What's up, Monty?
All right, there's okay. Um, so what I was going to say is that for our generation, right? I think one of the things that we kind of lost in our generation is kind of the separation of the sexes and kind of like who does what. So I think one of the things that's gotten kind of muddled is just we decide by committee and we'll make sure that everyone's happy and in on a team that doesn't really work, right? Like there has to be a leader, right? A decision maker. And there will be yeah, there will be people that will like, I'm not too keen on the decision, but you can't have two drivers, right? And one person's gonna, I think one of the things that we've lost in our generation is just it's okay to be decisive as the guy. And a matter of fact, I think not only is it okay, but I think that it's preferred. Like I think about like going on a trip and you try to decide what you're going to do on which day, right? It's much better to just and I'm not, as a matter of fact, this is from a book I just finished reading. See if I can remember the name of the book. It's the last book I've downloaded. It's called gosh, let me look. Last book I downloaded, it's called not 12 Rules for Life. I'm still listening to that. My library has The Way of the Superior Man. So it's an interesting book because it talks about just like how men should kind of see themselves, and one of the points he makes in the book is it's better to just have the conviction and make the decision, and instead of trying to gain approval, right? Like, hey, this is going to be okay, or because if you have this, this plan, this path that you want to take, like she'll come on a path with you. Like it'll be more exciting that way.
Well, here's the thing. Here, I think this is somewhat related to what you're talking about. And this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And it actually, it's something that goes along with this research into the 10 Commandments that I've been doing, which is basically, I feel like if you look at Christianity or any sort of, or if you look at even just blanket morality, I feel like there are essentially three categories of people. The first category is kind of like good people, right? Like people that follow the rules, like follow the 10 Commandments, for example. They're honest, they don't steal, they don't do it, they don't do bad things, right? They're more or less like the innocents, people that are innocent slash kind of ignorant, right? Second category is people that take advantage of those people in this group. So like people, because it's easy to steal from ignorant people. It's easy to steal from stupid people. It's easy to steal from naive people, or to take advantage or to exploit, people that you have power over, and the people that are willing to do that very, the ones that are more or less willing to do that are kind of in that other category, basically shitty people, right? The third category, I feel, are the ones that more or less exist in the middle, that kind of their role is to sort of combat or to protect the naive, the innocent, the kind of like whatever, like the good people, to protect the good people from the crappy people, basically. And the interesting thing is, ultimately, what ends up happening is, in order to really, in order to be able to fully combat or to do well, to in those circumstances, is you have to break those rules. You have to be aware of like terrible things in society. You need to see a lot of terrible things in society, stuff that, you know, not everyone can take and not everyone, you know, maybe can appreciate. And that's so to kind of bring it, you know, all the way. You know, I won't dig too much into it, but like that's kind of how I feel. At least the dynamic of my family is, and I was explaining this to my wife as well, is that my wife and my son are, I want to keep them in the category of, and maybe this is my mistake, but I want to keep them in the category of, I don't want them to have to worry about the stuff that I worry about. I don't want them to have to see the type of stuff that I see and go through the stuff that I've gone through, right? And maybe that's the fundamental error. I'm not sure. But the thing is, like, I feel like some of the stuff that I had to go through, a person is not supposed to go through it. You know, like those are things that not everyone is supposed to. So I want to protect them from those kinds of things. You know, like, and I appreciate the idea that some people have to, what is the expression, I guess, like to be hurt but not scarred. That's a Jordan Peterson thing, right? It's like you want to hurt children but not scar them, right? You want to make sure that they're able to deal with pain or deal with the rigors of life, but you don't want to traumatize them, you know, when you're bringing them up. So I believe in that as well. But that's the thing. It's like, in order to operate, I feel like in that space between the good people and the bad people, I think you have to be scarred. I think that you ultimately, the people in the middle are scarred people that decide, like it, I guess like it reminds me a lot in many ways of being, there are a lot of things that embodies, like in my life. For me, one embodiment is Asian American, right? Basically, like at a certain point, there has to be the generation or the group that has to eat it, right? So meaning that if you live in a family where there's a chain of abuse, so an abusive parents create abusive children, and abusive children become abusive adults, and then they abuse their children, abuse their children, abuse their children. There has to be a generation that decides, okay, I have to eat all that pain and not translate it into abusing my children. There's that generation. And so that's something similar that I had to go through in my life. And as well as like when I think about the Asian American experience, it's like one generation has to be both, right? So it's like in terms of like language and culture and integration or whatever, one generation has to be like, okay, we're going to fully integrate everything, and then from that point forward, then everything's going to be integrated, kind of thing. Like up until then, it's going to be like mixed. Like we're going to be more, you know, this group and that group, this, you know, whatever, blah blah blah. And then at a certain point, someone has to be the synergy, and they're like, okay, I'm going to bridge the gap between the cultures, and then they have to take it on. And so that's where I feel like this scarred group is. There's this generation of people that ultimately have to sort of eat the garbage that the bad people or that bad influences or that circumstances given them, in order to, and then sort of is able to but connect and shield the ones that come after, if that makes sense. So for me, I feel like within a family, talking about roles, I think that's what dads do. Dads are the ones that kind of have to eat the garbage of the world, you know, to protect their families, so that their families don't have to deal with it, you know. And the tough dynamic that creates is that there's this, and maybe this is what you're talking about in terms of what has happened in this lost generation, is I want to be able to explain things to my wife about what's going on. I want her to be my partner. I want her to be the one who really understands kind of what I'm going through and maybe can support me in that regard. But she can't really, because she doesn't really know what I'm going through. Well, and in order for her to understand it, she will have had to sacrifice something I do not want her to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm being a arrogant dickhead about this.
Well,
but that's kind of the dilemma that I'm in.
Well, I think that's, again, when we talk about our generation, right? I think one of the things that our generation, certainly our generation, has lost is it's just what it means to have honest to goodness peers, right? Like, you to have your equals, like your group of guys, like, until, I mean, our generation has some of that because we're lucky. We're a little bit older before we had this crazy internet Instagram madness where, you know, people are getting all upset over people replying to stuff and they don't know, whatever. But before that, we actually had like cliques and groups of people, and that communication, and that's one of the reasons why that's so important is that you find an avenue to get that away from your family, especially from your wife, because, and this is something that I've learned in my 44, I'm 45 now, my 45 years of being on the planet. Like, some things you just don't go to the wife. Like, if you're having a really tough time, like, you might want to call your brother, call your best friend, call somebody, be like, hey man, work is kicking my ass. And then you walk in the house like, hey babe, how's everything? So I'm gonna have a tough day, but I'm okay. Because that's kind of sort of what it needs to be.
I mean, that's part of the dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Because the problem is, again, and this is just from my own analysis, and I'm not talking about everybody, this is my life. The difficulty that I'm having with my relationship right now is that there's this sort of double whammy where if I feel bad, then that negative feeling radiates through my family. I'm sort of the touchstone when it comes to my family's emotional well-being. So if I come home and I'm in a bad mood, mom's in a bad mood, and kids, you know, in a bad mood. Everybody. So I need to come in that door, and I need to be the energy
and Mike,
spark, right?
I'll tell you, this is probably, I'm not necessarily bragging on this as much as I'm just saying that it's a transition that I've made. And I think I made it about 3 years ago, maybe less than that, about 2 years ago. I remember very distinctly when I got to a point where I just stopped caring what day it was. like you know how, like, when you're a kid, you're super excited about Fridays and Saturdays, and
weekends,
super down about Mondays. Like, I got to the point where, like, what difference does it make? It's today, and every day becomes today, right? So Monday, you could be happy that it's Monday. You could be happy that it's Saturday. It's today. You're awake. You're alive. You can do all the stuff you have to do on Monday. You had to do the Sunday before the Monday. So what difference does it make? And so, like, that kind of way of looking at it, and that way of looking at it. And there's another thing that I do, and this is a ritual practice, is that if something is bothering me, I would almost literally stop in the store, walking on wherever I am walking, and I'll just ask myself, what is it? What's bothering you? What is bothering you? And sometimes it's just the smallest little thing, like, oh, I'm still worried about that, really? And then you have a chance to say, you know what? You're worried about something that in the long run doesn't matter anyways. So why are you still worrying about it? So, like, a lot of that mindset stuff is just simply mindset, right? Like, you're worrying about something that you can't control or you can't do anything about right now, and it's affecting your mood now, and it doesn't have to. Like, I learned that lesson, that there's always going to be something wrong. There's always going to be more that you can do. There's always something that you forgot to do. Somebody said something to you. Something is not sitting right with you. There's always going to be that. But I have certainly realized the mood is certainly a choice. It is 100% a choice. Like, you could have the worst day at work, and you could laugh at a joke on YouTube, and boom, your mood's changed. Now, I'm not too much into the I think they call it hustle porn, like, you know, like Tony Robbins. But that is one thing I did get out of Tony Robbins' book, is that he said that you have 100% control over your mood. And you could just do that by just choosing something to focus on, and whatever you have to do is still there. It's still going to be there, whether you're in a good mood or not. So I mean, that's what I've learned for myself. Go ahead.
I agree. I agree in principle.
It's hard.
What you're talking about.
It's not easy.
But the thing is, like, I feel like there is, I think what I would say is you are 100% in charge of your attitude, right? In terms of your approach or your perspective, like the way that you want to process things.
Fair enough.
But for me, I guess, like, the reason why I have to push back against the word mood is that mood to me, sort of, there's a connotation of emotion and feeling. And I feel like so much of that is like the brain chemistry that you can't control, because there might be days when, like, this is the reason why I bring this up, is that I don't know if you've ever had like chronic pain, maybe like as an athlete or maybe something. There are situations where when you have chronic pain and then suddenly that pain disappears, you realize, like, oh,
this is what normal's supposed to feel like.
I can be a nicer person now. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's like sometimes the mood or the emotion that you're carrying is actually an extension of, this, maybe you've been going through your days with this throbbing pain in your head, and it's just been wearing down your own reserve, and so things just bother you more, and you're thinking things are crappy, but then, like, that pain goes away and you're just like, ooh, you know what, world's pretty good, world's not a bad place, and that to me, I feel like, so I think you can buffer yourself a lot through attitude.
Yeah.
But there's that other factor of the leaching or toxic effect of brain chemistry, of your emotions, of especially sustained emotional or physical pain. And I feel like that's kind of where I'm at in terms of a draining of my reserves, because I've been sick recently, but I can't afford to take a day off, kind of thing. So I'm just like,
Mike, the funny thing about what you're saying is,
yeah,
like, that is, in a nutshell, that's manhood. Like, that's what manhood is by definition. And it's so interesting. And I don't want to get into the male female stuff, but I don't want to go too far into that stuff. But I think that a lot of women now that they've become modern women and they say, I want to be independent, I think now they're starting to understand, like, holy shit, this is what it is. Because, like, when I look at my father's existence, my grandfather's existence, like, just the men around me, like, they all went through blippity blip, right? Like, job insecurity, crap at work, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
And, like, that's kind of like, that's like to head a family, you have to go through that. Like, that's like part of the mud, right? Like, you're feeling crappy, but the bills have to be paid. People are depending on you, and in a way, you kind of sort of can't break down. Like, everyone feels sorry for me. I have to do all this because it's just kind of sort of what we do. Like, that's the job. Like, if you don't want the job, stay single. Right? That's kind of dad, husband, family leader thing. It's not. I'm not going to say it's thankless, but it's not easy. And I think this generation has certainly underplayed how important it is. Because,
well, I was thinking about, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but along the same lines, I don't, this is going to sound very, very insensitive, I think. But it so one of the interesting things I thought about is when I look at my role in my family, this is where my mind went. So, you know, judge me as you will. Is my life produces enough value so that I can support people around me.
Yep.
You know, so like the total benefit, you know, whatever. Like I've got enough money to support several people around me. You know, and then when I look at, again, this is terrible, very insensitive. When I look at my child, I'll start with my child. Net negative, right? All he does is consume. Okay. And I look at my wife. She is a net negative. She, you know,
Well,
she does things. She does things
in a monetary way, but
yes,
in a monetary way, but
and which is, you know, again, for even so, regardless of the measures, though, again, this is part of my sensitivity too. Even when you look at it from anyway, by any by any rubric, net negative. Again, I'm not saying that I don't love my wife. I don't say that she doesn't do anything, but you know, it speaks to, first of all, it speaks to how difficult it is to be, like, think about any sort of sustainability, right? How difficult it is to be a break-even point. Again, we talk about economics all the time. Break even is success, right? So being able to pull any degree of profit is amazing, is crazy, because just being able to operate any sort of system in a sustainable manner at a break-even point is it takes tremendous work. It's so difficult to be able to do that. If you look at, and so that's what I'm saying, like, even if you look at life morally, through, you know, just sort of any measure of value, monetarily, or who knows, right? It's so difficult, pollution-wise, so difficult to operate, carbon footprint, right? Like, so difficult to operate at zero, just to get to zero, right? So it's so easy to be a net negative, right? So that's all to say.
well, I mean, I'll push back on that a little bit in saying that there some things you can't really put a price on, and raising
you can't put a price on it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So like having a healthy, functioning child, and this part goes back into the father role, is that, like, there's a really tough balance between shielding your children too much and like not giving them enough of reality, especially for boys, because like you can't really hold boys' hand through life. At a certain point, when he's 20 and he wants to consider starting his own family, girls are going to look to him like, I want you to be like my father, right? And that's when the reality of, okay, now I got to swim, I got to sink or swim on my own 2 feet, it's reality for young boys trying to become men, right? So the part of the job of your wife, his mother, is to prepare him for, like, the, not just the be able to do it part, but to be able to handle it part. Like, I think that's the role of what a mother does for boys, right? Like, you have feelings. I know you're dealing with feelings, and your father's going to tell you there's a certain way you got to deal with them because that's the way he has to do. But as your mom, I care, right? Because that's like the biggest difference between, like, fathers and mothers, I think, is that I think mothers care by default. Like, they have to care, right? Like, you were in that person's body for 9 months and you came out, and like, you're separated. But for men, like fathers, hey man, it's tough out here, dude. Like, you better get ready to sink or swim. So sometimes we can't look at our child and say, oh, you're so cute little, especially for boys, right? Like, hey man, come on. And then, that little triangle, the reason why that triangle is so important is, like, okay, back, you can give them a little bit more space, be a little bit easier on them, or the opposite, well, right?
Here, the interesting thing is, and again, this is, I don't know how insensitive this is going to come across as well, but it's amazing. I'm constantly amazed at what my son absorbs, what my kid absorbs, because, and again, this is going to sound super unfair, but my my son picks up my wife's sort of whiny tone. And it's interesting as an adult, or I shouldn't say as an adult, as an observer, as a third party observer, my wife is seeing, it's almost like she is the first time facing herself. Because it's like when my son starts using the same kind of voice and the same kind of actions that he has absorbed from her, right? He no, it's not like he picked that, it's not like that's natural. He picked that up from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? That tone and those tactics, those are not inherent in a person. I don't have, he had to learn from somewhere. It came from zero. He came out, he came into the world brand new, and given that, he doesn't watch TV, he doesn't really see a lot of other people. If he's whining and if he's not listening and if he's doing these kinds of things, part of it just could be trial and error. But if he is exhibiting a specific type of behavior, he picked it up from one of us. And it's not me. 100% it's not me, So I'm just like, so that's for me, I'm just like, it's an interesting process to kind of see what my wife's going through, because that's why, because I have only a handful of rules. And one of my rules is no whining. I don't want to hear any whining from my wife or from my son, and that's what that's what I tell my son. I'm just like, hey man, stop whining, stop whining. And then when he gives me the whiny tone, I'm just like, I go to my wife and I'm just like, stop whining, stop whining. I tell her too, and I'm just like, look, you need to stop whining, and you need to stop whining in front of him. He's learning this from you, and that's kind of part of the part of the situation that also annoys me, because I'm just like, it's like two children. It's like I've got two children here. I appreciate.
I understand what you're saying, and so this kind of goes back to the leadership part, right? Like, and I be honest with you, like, it's 2021. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you're not supposed to say and whatever, but until my father's generation, things worked pretty darn well in the family, right? So they were doing something right. And so most families operated with a woman supporting a man with a vision or dream or some goals, and then working together to establish whatever they're establishing. And all of these rules about trying to change the nuclear family to a whole bunch of other stuff, that came recently. But before then, especially for a man raising boys, right? Like the first 5-6 years, those years kind of sort of belong to the mother. Like they just do, right? Yeah. But then when the boy starts getting the social interaction at school and he starts seeing how other boys act, and then he has to kind of recreate himself to be socially acceptable as a boy, right? And that's kind of sort of where fathers come in, right? Like, this boy picked on me today. What am I supposed to do about it? Well, are you going to let him pick on you for the rest of the school year? Yes or no? So what are you going to do about it? And that's, boys get challenged in those situations. And this leads me to another area, but just simply put, I think our generation of men are just too emotional. Like we learn to listen to our emotions too much. And I say that because when I look at my grandfather, I don't think I ever saw my grandfather emote. I don't think I ever saw it. Like my grandfather went through some grade A boo-boo. I'll put it that way. Grade A. He had a tough life. I never saw him just not in a mood where he wasn't smiling. Now, was he always happy? Of course not. But I didn't see it. My parents, my uncles and aunts, they saw that side of him. But as grandkids, we didn't, right? And I think that's one of the roles of a father lead the family, right? Is you kind of have to protect them from that outside world because.
Well, okay, again, I don't know for sure. This is just my opinion, but I don't think it's I don't think it's a matter of we are too emotional. I think that the tools, I think we suck at channeling emotions, because I want to say that back in the day, you sort of just, I think by trial and error, people accidentally found vehicles to channel
Well,
emotions, especially men.
I think back in the day, men had outlets of other groups of men to channel their emotions,
or just whatever, right? Like you channel, like if you look at it, to me, and I haven't done any research on this, but I would love to actually analyze sort of historically, if you look at people that were in severe emotional distress, you know, like the overgeneralization that I'll make is look at all the amazing music and culture that was developed through the African community. You're just like, the people were, they had no outlets and they had no where to direct all this emotion, all this fury, all this whatever. So they just turned it into, not 100%, but in many ways, you just channel it into amazing creative outlets, amazing writing, amazing music, amazing, you know, dance, amazing, just culture. They created entire culture, basically. You know, they funneled their pain into culture, right? So fast forward to today, and you look at, you know, even though this is where I feel like a little bit of knowledge has kind of led us astray as a group of people, because I feel like so much of, even though we know more about emotions and trying to be able to channel our emotions, I feel like we're teaching people to do it just through talking and bitching and not doing anything, right? I feel like a lot of people's channels for their emotions and for their, you know, is bitching, right? Is just, let me just bitch about it. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to channel my rage into complaining about nonsense. I'm going to complain about this. I'm going to hate this. I'm going to join this group that also hates this thing. And that's where the emotions are going right now, rather than,
what can I do?
I'm frustrated, I'm going to do this thing. And I don't mean like storm the Capitol, but I mean like, let me play some music. Let me make something. Let me learn something. Let me become something, you know? And I think that's the problem, is that we've sort of taught ourselves to try to communicate our emotions more. But I feel like that's just the first step. That's a little bit of knowledge. And I feel like it's turned into this tremendous, like it turned into a sieve. Whereas like where people in the past really didn't know what to do. So they, like I said, they just sort of stumbled into channeling their emotions because we didn't even know what was going on. But now it's like, oh, if you're being too emotional, then like just try to, you know, just channel it through whatever. And I think people have just turned it. We've got these tools to just complain. Yes. And so that's where all people's emotions are going right now, is just complaining, is just talking about it, just spouting off. And unfortunately, when you combine that with the echo chambers that we live in, that emotion is just bouncing around everywhere, you know, as opposed to being, as opposed to propelling something, as opposed to fueling something. And
like you were alluding to a few minutes ago, is that like the great majority of the great inventions or the great successes of mankind have been basically due to the fact that there was no choice. Like you were in a situation of duress, you were stressed about a situation, and there was plenty of impetus for you to figure out a way to succeed because you really didn't have any other option, right? So like in a way, people that have the ability to complain they're complaining in part because they know that even if they complain and do nothing, they're still going to be okay, right? It's almost like complaining about a job that you hate. Like, you know that you can complain about the job all day long at home, and then you're going to get your paycheck, you're going to be able to pay the bills, and then you're going to go back to the job that you complain about. But when you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent because XYZ, like, who are you going to complain about? You got to get to work. So I don't know. I think when you're in a position where where complaining does you absolutely no good, and you're still going to have to produce something, I think that's where a lot of those successes come from, right? Like, people that are in that, I don't know, I think in Shangzu, they call it the death ground. Like, when you're in death ground and you have no chance except to turn around and fight, what good is complaining going to do when you know you got to fight or die? Like, people that are in those situations, or have been in those situations, realize that complaining about at least that situation in itself is just a waste of time. Get to work. So I think in a way, complaining has become a luxury, right? Like, if you're in a situation where you are going to be okay whether you do nothing or not, or do something or not, sure, complain about not liking it. But if you are in a situation where you got to do something, I think a lot of those people are less likely to complain about it, because if they don't do it, something adverse is going to happen, right? So yeah,
I think ultimately, I'm glad we got to talk about this, because I feel like in the end, I feel like I've talked myself into my own solution, where it's like, I just need to channel this frustration and channel this energy into the next thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like the other part of it is, like you mentioned before, is having this sense of having a peer, or really just having a sounding board sometimes, because it's just having some measure of, or feeling a measure of acknowledgement or understanding also kind of helps me to be like, okay, let me just let me just push through it.
One of the things that it actually does help with is there is a certain amount of relaxation that the rest of your family can have if they don't have to worry about you, right?
Yeah.
So like, that's a lesson I guess I learned probably on the backside, but I'll probably learn it better in my next relationship or whatever. But like, when you bring home that stress and that negative energy, like, it becomes an issue for someone else now, and they even feel like they need to find a solution for it, when it's quite possible that wasn't even your intent. Your intent was just like, hey, I thought I had a rough day, I just want to hear some nice words or something, right? And it's almost, in that situation, it's almost better to just directly say, hey, I don't know, what's the best way to say it? Like, come over here and give me a hug or something like this, or come kiss daddy or something like that, right? Yeah. As opposed to, oh man, work had me really bad. Work was real tough today, and I need somebody the sounding board. Like, I think for other guys that are going through that, I think that we respond to that better, right? Because if any person that's trying to start a business while they're working a job, or they're trying to take a risk to go after a dream or something, they understand that you're basically on a boat with a whole bunch of leaks in it, and you have some people sitting up there eating, I wouldn't say caviar, but they're sitting in the boat eating, sandwiches and watching television, and they're wiping their hands off and eating finger sandwiches. You're like, yeah, there's some leaks in this boat, but don't worry about it, right?
Well, it kind of goes back to, there are a lot of things that I think that are important about what we're talking about. Number one is that I feel it underscores really how hard it is to be a good parent, and how important it is to be an adult. Like, you have to be an adult to be a good parent, because basically your kids are absorbing everything that you do. Your family is absorbing everything that you do. And if you're not handling things at the worst of times with with some level of maturity or with some level of sophistication or some level of polish, then your kids are going to be then you're kind of, you're like you said, you're going to end up staining or polluting these other people in your life. And yeah, like it's tough to be like, even I feel like I have a reasonable head on my shoulders, and it's kicking my ass, it's kicking my ass to do this, you know? So I can't even imagine. Again, when I think back, I'm just like, if I were in my 20s, oh my God, I think my kids would have to be,
Oh
you know,
gosh. Yeah.
would be the most horrible people in the world. Like I think I would totally destroy my children, like sort of emotionally and mentally, psychologically, if I had to, because they would see me blow up all the time. They would see me, do whatever. I'd be breaking stuff, and who knows? Like I would have, because like I was so out of control relative to where I am now. So like I can't even imagine. I can't even
Well,
imagine that whole
well,
situation.
well, this is this to our credit, to our generation's credit, at least for a good portion of our
At least
generation.
we're getting married later.
Yeah, yeah, we're getting married later. We're having kids later. So like a
Yeah.
lot of us are figuring out a whole bunch of stuff before we even get married.
Well, kids have a different role, right? Because in the past, I think in the generations, probably like a couple generations before us, I guess it still exists, but kids were kind of like just a way to help. It was just like cheap labor. It was basically inherent, it was just like it was an investment. It was a labor investment, you know. So in terms of like their actual emotional or well-being, I don't think that was part of it. It was just like, we need people to help us work.
Yeah.
We need some extra hands around here, kind of thing.
Well, but as we move from the industrial,
Agrarian society.
yeah, into
Or an industrial
information
society,
age, right? Like when people have children now, they already understand. Like unless you have like a coding business in your apartment, or you're running some kind of like Amazon FBA business, and your 12-year-old can help you run it, like you don't have to have the kids, or
Right.
you could put off having the kids. So when you make the decision to have the kids, there's no making them feel guilty about, I buy this for you, I pay this for you. Like your obligation is to help them become a responsible, functioning adult. But you did not do the child a favor by birthing them, and our generation understands that. I mean, I would say
It's
one we're probably making a mistake on the other side by spoiling our kids, but I think our generation understands that. Well, some of us do, that it's not, we're not doing the kid a favor. Like we made the decision to have the kid, so we should raise the kid as such, right?
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes me like, speaking of that, kind of makes me want to pivot back to this idea of sustainability and appreciating sort of, a net zero, or a, whatever, some sort of positive positive, netting positive, that kind of lifestyle. Because I was watching a podcast the other day about how, or no, it wasn't a podcast. It was a YouTube video about basically how basically moving away from an agrarian society, like moving away from agriculture, or no, so the establishment of farming, as opposed to being a hunting and gathering society, allowed us to pursue, gave us the time to pursue things like science and innovation and philosophy and stuff like, because like, when you're a hunter gatherer, 90% of your time is getting food.
Enough food, yeah.
Your whole life is getting food, is producing
Right.
food for yourself. And so once we had efficient abilities to produce food,
Yeah.
and produce it in mass quantities for tons of people, then suddenly it freed those people up to be able to pursue other things. And I feel like that is a fundamental thing that people have forgotten.
Well, not only that, but not only did it free people up, but the people that freed up felt obligation to do something to contribute, right?
Yeah.
So I can be a blacksmith now. I can hone horses. I can chop meat at the butcher shop. You know,
But that's why,
or I
but
could,
that's why I kind oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, that's why I love aquaponics. That's why I love the prospect of producing my own food to some capacity, because honestly, I want to get back into, I want to appreciate that or be in touch with that aspect again, where it's like,
Mike, so I'm enjoying this topic. So let's take a cut here. Okay. And I'm going to come back to this one. Okay. All right.
which topic? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.